I think Weapons might be the best movie of the year, and the more that I think about it, there's one key decision they made that really unlocks the whole movie for me. The film takes place in this American suburb, and at 2:17 in the morning, all of the kids in this one classroom get up out of bed, run out of their houses, and are never seen again. And the movie shows the aftermath of this small town as they're dealing with this loss. Now, that is a great hook for a horror movie. It's very simple, but as we all know, a great movie doesn't just mean having a great story. It's about how that story is told. Weapons does not tell it in a conventional way. Now, I'm not going to talk any spoilers in this video. I'm not going to talk about the plot, but I do think the absolute best way to watch this film is going in knowing as little as possible. So if you haven't seen it, I would recommend going and watching it first. But if you don't mind a bit more context, I'm going to talk about the structure of the film. See, most movies follow just one character. There might be other side characters around, but we generally follow one person from beginning to end. Weapons doesn't do that. The movie starts in the perspective of one character, and then after a period of time, it jumps to the perspective of another character, and then another character, and every time it jumps to the perspective of another person, it never jumps back. Now, Weapons is far from the first movie to do this kind of perspective switching. Pulp Fiction is very famous for it, obviously. Go is another great film that does it, but I've never seen it done like this in a horror film. And that makes it sound like it's going to be some sort of gimmick, but I think it really unlocks a great way of telling this story. Because this film is about how the disappearance of these kids affects this small town. And by jumping between the different characters, you get a much broader idea of how it affects everyone in it. You could tell the story and focus on just one person, and I think it would still work just fine. But by spreading it around these different characters and dedicating so much time to each of them, you get a far better idea of how broad the impact is. You get the perspective of the teacher who's teaching that class and she feels like she was left behind. You get the perspective of one of the parents who's lost their child and like how horrible that is for them. You get to see it from a police perspective and see how kind of powerless they are in the situation. And because none of them are the singular main character, it kind of opens up how Zach Cregger is able to depict all of them. Because all the characters in this are already pretty flawed people. And then they've got the whole pressure cooker of the situation. Because the movie isn't focusing on one main character through the whole runtime, it doesn't have to worry about making them super likable or really sympathetic. I don't think it would have been possible the same way if they'd told this story linearly. And the other side effect is that it completely changes the rhythm of the film. See, film is a little bit constrained as a medium for telling stories. Books can kind of be whatever length they want, TV shows nowadays can kind of be whatever length they want, films kind of top out at about 3 hours, most of them are about 2. And so because that isn't a lot of time to tell a story, there ends up being a kind of structure most movies end up following. And with that structure comes a rhythm. If you've watched a lot of movies, you know there's a point where you can kind of feel when it switches from the first act to the second act, or when it switches from the second act to the third act. Sometimes that rhythm can make it easier to know where a film is leading to. But with Weapons, because it switches POV, that momentum gets reset, that rhythm gets reset. A lot of movies can start to drag in the middle, but every time it switches to a new character, it feels like the movie is just kickstarting again in a new direction. And the experience of that is brilliant, because when you're trying to figure out like what the hell happened with these kids, where did they go, why did they go, and you just never really have any idea, even as it's giving you more and more information. And then when it does actually get to the third act, it delivers something I never would have seen coming. And I don't think the surprise, the shock value of any of that would have worked if they'd told this in a conventional way. Now, usually when a movie is good and it does something interesting like this, I'm just excited that it's a great movie. But beyond this movie itself, I now have a lot of hope for writer-director Zach Cregger. Because his next project is an adaptation of the Resident Evil video games. Now, I don't have a huge connection to that franchise, but to me, that's an opportunity for him to step up into the big leagues. Because this film and his last movie, Barbarian, are small, modestly budgeted horror films. But Resident Evil, because it's a franchise, it's going to have a much bigger budget, it's going to have a much bigger marketing push. Now, a bigger project doesn't inherently mean a better movie, but for a director, if their movies make more money, that gives them more creative control for the next one. Chris Nolan did a number of smaller movies, then he did Batman Begins, and from there his entire career changed and he can now do pretty much anything he wants. Same again with Greta Gerwig. She does 2 original films, then takes on a studio project with Barbie, and now she can make whatever she wants. Now, I'm not saying that Resident Evil is on the same level as Batman or Barbie, but after doing a couple of original movies, taking on a studio project and doing it really well can be the pathway to creative freedom. And with how good Weapons was and how good Barbarian was, I just want to see a studio let Zach Cregger do whatever the hell he wants. If you've seen Weapons, let me know what you thought in the comments below. Try to keep it spoiler free, and make sure to subscribe so you don't miss anything else coming up on the channel.